Throughout the ages, people all over the world have searched for the secrets to long life. Helen finally reluctantly admitted her true age for her big 90th birthday party, and a close friend searched and found her birth certificate since he didn't believe she could possibly be that old. Perhaps now that she is ready to enter her second century, we might discover her secret in the story of her life. Coming from good Scandinavian stock could be one reason for longevity. Helen's mother and grandparents were some of the multitudes who came to the United States for a new life, and like many from Norway and Sweden, they settled in the cold northern Midwest.
I don't know a great deal about my ancestors, but I do know that my grandfather was born near Stockholm, Sweden, and he and his brother came to the United States together. Well, when my grandfather hit Ellis Island, he changed his name from Johansson to Bergstrom. Now, whether his brother did the same thing or not, I'm not sure. But my grandfather went to Minnesota, and that's where he met my grandmother. My grandmother, her brother and sister came from a little town that starts with M near Stockholm. So they were Swedish, and they came to Minnesota also. My great aunt, which was my grandmother's sister, was an artist, and so she went to Fargo where she did paintings, and we are luckily have one painting that she did, and it was a painting of a Sunday scene that they saw every Sunday when they went to church. But my Uncle Matt, he opened something that's similar to a bar or cocktail lounge in Fargo. It was quite large, and he did very well at it. And my grandmother married Carl, and then they opened a boarding house where they sold lodging to people, and then they had a restaurant along with us. The local people could eat there, and they did very well at it. Well, then when North Dakota opened up the land for homesteading, my grandfather went out there, I think it was before 1905, but about approximately that time, and he homesteaded. Well, when my dad got to be 14, 15 years old, my grandmother figured that she could help him on the farm. So that's when he went to North Dakota to live with his dad. And my grandfather built quite a nice home for the area at that time. And he lived in that the rest of his life. My father lived in it for quite a long time too, but they did some remodeling to it to make it nicer.
Carl and Marie's son Harry was born in 1890, a first-generation American but full-blooded Swede, like his two brothers.
Hector was the middle one, and he run the grain elevator in Fergus Falls, where Ed was the oldest, and he was 10 years older than my dad. There was 5 years between each of them. And what I remember was they lived on a farm near Moorhead, not too far away, and then later they opened a restaurant in Oriska, North Dakota, and they did very well at that. They had a family reunion of the ancestors, the Bergstrom family they called it, and my brother, oldest brother Clifford, and I went to it, and we were treated like kings and queens. It was very, very fun, and it was only their children that was there, and their spouses and their children. They told me who they belonged to, and it was very, very interesting. We thoroughly enjoyed it. But my dad married Jenny Boo, who came over with Abelsons from Norway. She was born in Norway, and her father apparently drowned in a fishing accident. I'm not sure. He was a fisherman. And her mother remarried, so she went with Abelsons. I suppose she was 17, 18 years old at least when she came to the United States. And they came to Sanish, which was not too far from Plaza. And that's where she met my dad, 1921 or what, but very close to that when they got married. After they were married, they started having babies. They had Clifford, that's my oldest brother, A year and a half later, I was born. My name is Helen. A year and a half later, Palmer was born. A year and a half later, Eva was born. I loved butter as a child, and I wasn't very old, and I'd crawl on top of the table. If anyone left butter out, I'd eat all the butter. And I got scolded by my mother for doing this, and so I went and sat under the table and blew bubbles. And she said, you know what I think I need to do? I need to make you, I don't remember what they called it, but they'd wrap sugar in a cloth and you'd suck on it. If you were naughty, that's what you got, so that you would behave more. I remember that very distinctly. And my mother was a very cheerful person, according to the neighbors. Hard worker, and always happy, always had a good time. And she loved to dance, and my dad was a very good dancer. A year and a half later, she became pregnant again. Well, this baby must not have been full term because he died, and she had blood poisoning. And at that time, they did not have penicillin or any of the antibiotics they do now. And so they told her there was nothing could be done for her, that she would die. And so when the baby died, they just put the baby on ice so that they could be buried together. But while my mother was in the hospital, she made this cap for me, because it was quite customary to wear a cap like this when you went to bed at night. And it's held up really quite well, considering how old it is. But she was very good at crocheting, apparently, because it's very nice crochet work. So for 2 weeks, she knew she was dying, and my grandmother promised her that she would take all four of us, my dad too, because she had a 4-bedroom house in Moorhead, Minnesota. So she had plenty of room for us, and she would take care of us. And I think I was my mother's biggest worry. I don't know, I must have been a little hellion, because she worried more about me than the other 3. And Grandma said not to worry, that she would take care of me.
Helen's grandmother, Marie Bergstrom, promised to care for all 4 children at her house, and her son, newly widowed Harry, came with them. The new family unit went for a formal photograph, starting Helen's childhood in Moorhead, Minnesota.
Grandma said, "You gotta cut that hair out of your eyes," and she cut it way, way back. And then she says, "And don't smile. In every picture, you're always laughing or smiling. Don't smile." So you notice we're all sober? The older I get, the more I admired my grandmother, because she was 69 when she took 4 little brats, and my dad lived with her, and she'd been living alone before then. She always dressed fit to kill. Yes, she was always dressed up. Wore gloves and hat always. My dad came there. He went to work for the lumberyard in Moorhead, Minnesota. And he rented out the farm, but the man he rented the farm to didn't do a very good job, and he didn't get any money out of it, so he decided he would go farm himself. And so this is what he did. And when Cliff was in the 5th grade, Grandma figured that he was big enough and strong enough that he could help Dad on the farm. And he was getting to be a handful for her too. So he went to the farm at Plaza, North Dakota. Dad was still in Moorhead at the time. We all went to a picnic. And there was friends of Grandma's there from Sweden who did not have any children. And the lady said, "Oh, she sure wished she had a little boy like my brother Palmer." We called him Bree. And he run and hid behind Grandma because he didn't want anything to do with these people. But Eva, she was about 2 years old at the time, got up and went over, and she says, "Well, I will be your girl." Well, they talked my dad into letting her go home with them just for the weekend. Then they called and wanted to know, couldn't she stay another week? And he said, "Okay." Well, they wanted to adopt her, but Dad said, "Oh, no, we wouldn't do that." And week went into a month into 2 months, and she did not want to go live with Grandma. She wanted to live with them. They spoiled her rotten, gave her anything she wanted, and so Eva did not grow up with us. In Moorhead, we did have electricity, and we had a pump in the kitchen, so we had water, running water in the house. And Moorhead has artesian wells, so it was pure water and very good. But we did not have indoor plumbing. There were a few homes that had indoor plumbing, but the majority of the homes in Moorhead did not have indoor plumbing at that time. They all got it later.
So was it cold going out to the outhouse in Minnesota in the winter?
Yes, it was. It was, and Grandma had a big wood shed, and we'd fill it with wood every year, so we had to carry wood in. Most of the time she burned soft coal in the kitchen and hard coal in the living room. She had heaters in both places, but it heated the whole house very good. But we always had, in the summertime, she made bread every Saturday. We had homemade bread, and she had a white oak kitchen floor, and she'd scrub it until it was just pure white. Then she'd set us in chairs and give us all fresh homemade bread. My grandmother didn't believe in girls being able to do anything, but boys could do everything. And my brother, Palmer, which we call Bergie, had a bicycle, and he and a friend were out, and the fire truck went by, so they decided to follow the fire truck. Here comes a car right behind him and hits him, knocks him off the bike, and he had a brain concussion. Worse than that, a fractured skull. And my grandmother at that time was visiting her son in Fergus Falls and their family, and we had a lady taking care of my brother and I. And of course he had to go into the hospital, and they operated on him. They put a steel plate in his head. And we also figured that maybe it's something to do with the way he acted and the way he worked. But I was so mad when we went down to the train depot to meet Grandma. Here this lady starts in terrible how he's going to die, and here he was in the hospital doing just fine. And I tried to interrupt her and tell her that he was just fine, but she had her version of it. But anyway, he was allowed to do everything, so he was always in trouble. But he was allowed to do it and get away with it, where I couldn't. And when I lived with my grandmother, from the time I moved there, it was my job to water all the plants, wash all the saucers under all the plants, and be sure there was no cobwebs or nothing on any of them. They looked real healthy and fine. And two of the things that my grandmother had, which I marveled at, was she had 2 oleander bushes potted in the house. She had a house that was very adequate for all of us. It was 4 bedrooms up and 1 bedroom down, and had a nice big living room with a bedroom off of it, and a dining room and kitchen, and then an extra addition where she washed clothes. We didn't have a washing machine. We washed clothes with a scrub board and tub. And we lived right next to the Episcopal Church in Moorhead, between 2nd Avenue and 8th Street. So one of the things that she did to bring in extra revenue was to wash all the white gowns that the choir wore. And so she made extra money that way. And then she had 2 city lots that she planted in potatoes every year. And it was our job to pick all the potato bugs off of it and keep it weeded and nice. And she made a lot of money off of the potato lots. And that's where she was able to maintain a home and feed us and take care of us and do everything. My dad did what he could. He'd send her money every once in a while, just like he would send the people her Eva went to live with.
Helen's grandmother took good care of the children, and she liked staging photographs on their front porch with props and sometimes even costumes.
We were in a play, and he was the Easter Bunny, and I was lettuce or something. And Grandma made our outfits for us, and I thought she did a real good job on the Peter the Rabbit.
Helen has many more memories of her childhood in Minnesota.
One of the things I remember about my grandmother, she made dandelion wine every year, and we'd have to pick the first dandelions that came into bloom because they had to be very, very fresh. But her wine was just absolutely exquisite, clear as a bell. But it embarrassed me when the school nurse would come to visit us. Grandma would treat her cookies in this white wine, and I didn't think that was proper, but she thought it was. And she made big crocks of it every year. Oh, I was a real reader. I read everything I could get my hands on. And so she enrolled me in the public library and let me go down there. And I would read under the blankets. We had electric lights there, so I'd pull the shades and put towels around the windows so the lights wouldn't shine out. She slept in the bedroom downstairs, and I had a bedroom upstairs. And I had a lamp with a green shade, and I'd hang towels so that she couldn't see I had the light on. And I would read every night till 3 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd turn it off. Well, she wondered how come I got so many books. She says, "You can't read all of those books. You aren't reading those all." And so she caught me one night at 3 o'clock in the morning still reading. So after that, I was limited as to what I could take from the library. But I just loved to read, and I read everything I could lay my hands on. And when I went to the farm when I was 14, there wasn't a library. And there was very much I could get. I read every newspaper I could lay my hands on. Didn't matter what it was, I read it. And I'd argue politics all the time because that's what I read. That's all was in the papers. So I was all up on everything that was going on in the United States at that time. This lady across the street, her name was Helen, same as mine, and she offered to give me free piano lessons if I wanted it. Well, all Grandma had was a pump organ. There was no way I would play that pump organ, so I wouldn't take lessons, and I've regretted it all my life. There's Helen, Walden, and I. They lived across the street from Grandma and us, but then they moved right next door. We were real good friends. We were together all the time. Did everything together. I used to go out to Swan Lake with the Helens every year. And Helen and I would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go fishing. We never came home empty-handed. We always had fish. People were really good to us when we lived with Grandma. They were always doing things for us. Wallen, he was a professor at Concordia College. They always gave me money to go to all the plays or anything that was going on. They wanted to make sure that I went to it. And the Olanders lived next door. They called Bergie Farmer always, but they were always giving us things and doing things for us. And so I grew up in quite a nice neighborhood. The house where I grew up in is long gone, and there's an apartment building there now. It was right next to the Stone Church. And the Stone Church is, of course, a historical marker in Moorhead. It's very unusual, very different, and very nice. The neighbors next door, the Garrity's, they had 5 children. They gave each one of them a baby chick for Easter, and so they gave me one also because I was at their house a lot. And it turned out not to be a hen but a rooster. And I joined the 4-H club and I showed it at all the shows, and I won first prize all the time. So this rooster made me quite a bit of money. And I used to scrub its legs and feet with the toothbrush so it would look nice, and it was very tame and very well behaved. And it was my pet. I didn't have a dog or a cat or anything, but Rooster was my pet. Well, as it got older, it started to crow, and the neighbors objected. They said that rooster has to go. So one Sunday, Grandma decided to have a rooster chicken dinner. Needless to say, I wouldn't touch it, wouldn't eat a thing. I felt so bad because I lost my pet, because that was the only pet I'd ever had. These are some sayings that my grandmother used, my dad used, and we picked them up from my dad. Mitt i vagen, and we use that a lot when the dogs are in the way. That means you're in the way, get out of the way, mitt i vagen. And ufta has several meanings, but ufta means it's pretty bad. And ufta me, meaning, oh, how could you possibly do that? And ista fida, meaning, oh, that's terrible, what a mess. Probably talking about a dog chewing something up. That's when this would be used. or if the cats did something that wasn't right.
Helen clearly remembers some major historical events.
Anyway, another interesting thing at that time, I think I was probably 4th or 5th grade or something like that, when President Hoover was inaugurated. People did not have radios at that time. They would make crystal radios, which were, you had to really listen and you'd be very careful, but everybody made their own, battery operated. Well, anyway, they felt that everybody in the school, this is the Sharp School, is now completed and been going strong for 5 years, and had a beautiful auditorium. So they were able to bring in a radio that we could all hear, and they gave the inaugural address that Hoover gave. So that was quite a thrill for all of us. Then in 1927, when Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic Ocean into Paris, when he came back, he traveled all around the United States to different towns and cities, and he came to Moorhead. We were really proud because Moorhead wasn't that big a city, but they had a big parade for him, and I remember taking his picture and being so thrilled that he would come to Moorhead to see us. I made myself extra money when I lived with Grandma by babysitting the Garrity kids. They had 5 kids, and they were lively ones. So they paid me 50 cents an hour to play with them and entertain them. And she taught me how to do some cooking, which Grandma didn't. And I'll never forget the first time she taught me how to make white sauce. I never did forget it. But anyway, I was getting quite a sizable bank account, because every penny that I ever got, I put it in the bank. Well, in 1929, we had the crash, and the banks all closed. And there went all my money. And my dad had put enough away for me to have a college education, because that's what I wanted. One of my best friends, Helen, her father was a professor at Concordia. And of course, I wouldn't dream of not going to college, so that's what I had in my mind, that I wanted to go to college. And so I put all this money in the bank when the crash came. My grandmother always made us go to Sunday school every Sunday and then go to church. And she always had a black taffeta dress she wore when we went to church. And I went there all the time and was confirmed. The pastor's son was confirmed the same year I was, and that was when I was 14, and then that following summer is when I went on Memorial Day when I was 14. My dad and I drove back to Plaza, North Dakota, in pouring rain, sliding off the road and having a terrible time getting back on the road, but we made it. And for years I used to celebrate the 30th of May, because that's when I moved to North Dakota.
Of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love.